All right. Well, good evening, everybody. I appreciate you joining us this evening. My name is Randall Dietrich, Executive Director of the Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum up at Camp Ripley. I appreciate seeing everybody joining us tonight on an anniversary, which is a complicated one. And thankfully, we have some impressive presenters that will share their perspectives, their experiences at the very least, and provide at least some greater context for us to understand Operation Iraqi Freedom and what it meant on the individual level over the last 20 years. The Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum has made a real commitment to gathering these post 9/11 stories. We've used this online forum that you're participating in tonight to sample a number of stories who all happen to be Minnesotans. We've heard from Mariah Jacobson, whose father was aboard Flight 93, Tom Burnett. We heard from Mariah. We've heard from Scott Wallace, who was in the North Tower of the World Trade Center and a survivor who was able to tell his story. We heard from Mike Hurley, an Edina, Minnesota resident who was working with the CIA Operation Anaconda and came back to co-author the 9/11 Commission report. We heard from Mike McElhaney, who was with ODA 574, working with Hamid Karzai in December of 2001. We've heard from Mike Kolstad, who was with at this Saddam Hussein trial, actually in the courtroom. So if your name is Mike or Michael, there's a good chance you've made history since that's 3 in a row. But again, just a number of examples of Minnesotans who have really been on the front line of history. Rachel Cochran and Jacob Helgestad, who were with the National Guard unit, the 400 who were at HKIA airport in Kabul, Afghanistan in August of 2021, really representing a number of Minnesota stories that we've been capturing in this forum, and it allowed us to hear those stories and hear from those people who again have really front seats to history and have been involved really in the front line in this global war on terror that started in, of course, on September 11th. We did work with the Department of Military Affairs to develop a program at the state capitol in St. Paul. And at that meeting on the state capitol steps, we heard from General Joseph Votel that day, who gave the keynote address on the state capitol steps on September 11th, 2021, and the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. His keynote address is actually available on our YouTube page. You should check it out. It's brief, to the point, and terribly poignant because what he really implored us to do as a state and as a nation is to look at the stories in between, to not let the story of 9/11 and what that day meant or what the evacuation from Kabul, Afghanistan looked like 20 years later, to overshadow those in-between stories. And that was a terribly compelling message, at least for me, and I think for all of us, to make sure that we really comprehend, study, explore the 20-year legacy of this global war on terror. And here briefly in a few minutes, we'll be talking about the actual memorial to be built on the Capitol grounds. So coming full circle in many ways, but when a 4-star general tells you to do something, you tend to do it. So that leads us to where we are now, which General Votel telling us to not miss the stories in between. Well, Operation Iraqi Freedom from 2003 to 2011 is a story in between. And so we are enriched this evening by not only having the Minnesota Military and Veterans Museum participating and all of you, but also new partners with the National Memorial to be developed in Washington, D.C., as well as our friends at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. So we won't hold that against them. They're good partners and allies with us, Wisconsin and Minnesota working together. Hopefully Iowa will be joining us here soon as well. But that brings us to this point, obviously, to not miss those stories in between. So when you have a chance, do go on YouTube, check out General Votel's comments from that morning on September 11, 2021, telling us that we can't miss the individual stories of valor and service and countless Minnesotans and Wisconsinites stepping forward when asked to do so and doing it in a dramatic kind of way. So I appreciate all of you joining us tonight. And with that, we have our presenters with us. Patricia Baker is a voice that we'll hear from here in just a moment. Rod Rodriguez from the National Foundation, and then a familiar face of some of us, General Joseph Votel, all joining us this evening. I want to welcome all of them and appreciate they all taking their time. You know, if we spend some time looking back 20 years ago, we were all in a very different place. And who would have thought that 20 years from then, we would be meeting online to talk about it in this way. So remarkable in some ways to have these people with us to provide their very unique insights, because they were, again, very much on the front line of the global war on terror, both historically what it's meant and how it will be remembered in the future. So really appreciate the three of these individuals sharing their stories with us tonight. And with that, Rod Rodriguez, welcome.
Hey, Randall. Hey, I'm really excited to talk to everybody. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute button for some reason. So really excited to join you guys this evening.
Appreciate having you. Where are you joining us from this evening, sir?
I am right now, I'm about 3 miles from the Riley Road access gate at Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
Very good. I appreciate you joining us. Thanks for participating tonight. General Votel, welcome, sir.
Randall, it's good to see you. Thanks for organizing this. I look forward to our fun discussion this evening.
Patricia Baker as well, welcome.
Thanks, Randall. Pleasure as always, and especially tonight on this commemoration evening.
And also wanted to welcome Eric Wright. Eric, where are you calling us from tonight?
I am right here in the capital of Wisconsin, in Madison. And thank you for having me on with everybody else tonight. I feel very honored to be here with so many distinguished players in this whole chapter of our history.
And can you tell me just one thing or two about the museum in Madison, right?
Yes, sir. We're right on Capitol Square. And what we do is we tell the story not only of Wisconsin's military endeavors, but also the veterans that have served from Wisconsin. We really feel that it's important not only to put the history out there, but also be able to talk about the people who made that history as well. And that's what I'll be doing tonight.
Thank you for joining us, Eric. I think there's going to be a chance for us to work together here in the future. Boy, the Center of Military History, of course, does not miss a beat when it comes to developing great maps for us to look at. And maybe a takeaway message, this first map provided by CMH, just March through May of 2003. There's a lot happening, obviously, and I guess remarkably, it's a bit of a blur, right? Because things were happening just so quickly, and maybe even more quickly than anybody imagined, getting ahead of ourselves in some ways 20 years ago, but it was a very active time. The 48-hour ultimatum for Saddam Hussein to leave passed. The air campaign began, and 20 years ago today, the ground campaign initiated. So with that, a whole flurry of activity followed, of course. You do have the 75th Rangers back on April 6th, taking and securing Haditha Dam, and you have U.S. forces occupying Baghdad as early as April 9th. So in quick order, U.S. forces were in many ways everywhere throughout Iraq and moving very, very quickly. And then also just another map from CMH identifying various milestones from June of 2003 through May of 2004. You do have a number of milestones, of course, and some of them we talked about here in just a second, but one for sure, you do have a truck bomb that is a major setback for the UN happening on August 19th. And then you do have, Saddam Hussein finally apprehended on December 14th, which, as Patricia Baker has told me, made the news, but it didn't end the war. But Patricia Baker is far better prepared to speak to that than I am about what her experiences were. 20 years ago and her entry in country in Iraq. Patricia, could you share your story with us?
Absolutely, Director Dietrich. I would love to touch on the first year of the war and my personal experience with that. In early 2003, I was a 28-year-old commander of Bravo Company 24 Aviation Regiment, 4th Combat Aviation Brigade in the 4th Infantry Division Mechanized. And I was General Odierno's Command and Control Company commander. So we knew, having already seen everything that had unfolded from January through February, we knew we were bound for war. Operation Cobra 2 mission briefings were done. The aircraft were already loaded up at the port and had left Texas and were on their way to Iraq. And I was sitting in my on-post house watching the news on the 19th of March when I saw the first shots of the war on my TV. And I knew that instant that my Banshee air crews were bound for Iraq. It was the 50 air crews of my company that were just waiting to get that call and muster at an unnamed parking lot outside of a gym on base with our duffel bags over one shoulder and our flight gear on the other. And we got that call. Not 10 days later, we were called up and we were on our way, having left Fort Hood for Iraq. It's 20 years later, and even now, that moment, that call up, that muster is still jarring. The first tour, however, kicked off, and it was austere and eerily calm. When we first got into country, it was so calm. There was just this couple of months of quiet. But my 10 aircraft landed eventually at Tikrit Airfield, which is just 100 miles northwest of Baghdad and just 8 miles away from Saddam Hussein's Summer Palace. That's the palace that the 4th Infantry Division took over and used as a headquarters. And we were stationed at the airfield, not 8 miles away. But when we first flew in, we were preceding the entirety of the division. So my air crews landed at Tikrit Airfield, which was bombed out and cratered, and we were clearing the debris with our bare hands. And this was April of 2003. Because if we didn't clear that, we couldn't bring in the rest of those airframes safely, and there was nowhere else to safely land. So we were clearing debris off of an airfield with our bare hands. And that's how the war started for us. From April till June, we did nothing but eat MREs and fly long, hot days across the Iraqi desert. The long flying days, sometimes 8-9 hours, crossing and crisscrossing the entirety of the battle space. We'd eventually move into tents, and after 62 days, we got to eat something other than MREs. But those tents would blow over every day in the Iraqi heat and the dusty wind. And we'd string together day after day after day of these long, transitory, cross-country sort of flights, because the ground convoys hadn't started up yet. The movement through the battle space, which would become the sectors that you saw in that map of Iraq, were not yet being, they weren't the convoys that moved all the supplies and equipment that we think of today. But by July of 2003, it all changed. That's when the violence and the insurgency and the terrorism aspects really took hold in the 4th Infantry Division sector. And by the capture of Saddam Hussein, which you mentioned, 8.8 nautical miles away from my command post, that second week of December, my Banshee air crews had already flown 38 named battles across the entirety of the 4ID campaign, just from July through December. We spent mission after mission flying command and control, flying air assaults, flying infiltrations into Baghdad and exfiltrations to Kirkuk and Samara and Baqaba. By the time we got to December and the Ace of Spades was caught by 4ID, my air crews had logged hundreds of combat hours. I was a low time guy with only 500 combat hours. I had some air crew members with close to 800 combat hours in less than 8 months. During that time frame, it was challenging, it was trying, but the reward for that sacrifice was bringing everyone home. That was the reward for that sacrifice. All those Banshee air crews made it home in March of 2004. I still use that call sign, Banshee 06. I still use it to this day, sometimes in the company of my fellow combat aviators. But 20 years on, I realized that we're this band of brothers. We're something more. We're not reenactors. We're not journalists covering warfare from a safe bunker or behind a safe computer screen. We were the combatants. We were asked to be the warriors. Sometimes unheralded citizens that did this in the name of and in service to the Republic. This 20th commemoration, it's bittersweet. It's very bittersweet for me, Randall, because this is the year that I elect to retire. How fitting, how apropos that 20 years later, I find myself here with you on this commemoration of the 20 years since the beginning of the Iraq War. And I'm grateful to be a part of this archiving of our important history.
Well, Patricia, speaking of archiving history, I'm going to show a couple photographs of you, if I may.
Is this the part where you embarrass me for the rest of the time I'm on with you tonight, Randall?
This is that time, yes, Patricia. You've timed it exactly correct. That's correct. Spend a minute with us and just provide us some context for what we're looking at here, please.
Absolutely. Although these three people in this photo, these three aviators are smiling, we were actually just crying a few minutes before we took this picture, because we were at the memorial for two of our fellow 101st air crew members who had been shot down by RPG not a few days before that. And we were so relieved, we were so glad to see each other that we were smiling amidst the tears that day in November 2003. Now in the next picture, I'm pretty sure the story is a little bit more, a little bit happier. That same smiling aviator is sitting in that same Black Hawk 5 years later. Door guns ready and loaded. And in that 2008 picture, ready to fly a day into night mission on behalf of the ambassador from the United States. And that was just a typical day, probably a Sunday night in Iraq. That's her, the shortest aviator in the United States Army, if you didn't know. And because you find yourself as the shortest aviator in the entire aviation brigade, when it comes to pre-mission, pre-flight checks, once you know, I tended to be the person that was climbing around rotor blades and opening up hydraulic decks, mission after mission after mission. I'm glad to do it, glad to do it. This is a very, very special photo for me. It's been said that the military is family and the military runs in families. And I am a testament to that. That's myself standing next to an anti-aircraft machine gun, which is the trophy in front of an aviation brigade headquarters, with my father. And this was my second combat tour in Iraq, his first. However, that first Sergeant Baker right there is a Vietnam vet. And he ended his career on deployment with me in Balad, Iraq. The military does run in families, Randall. It runs in families.
clearly.
The most boring Iraq war picture ever. But there's a story behind this too. Not just that it exists in a museum right now, but that air map right there, if you unfold it, it's the size of a poster. And on any given day at the beginning of the war, it'd take 5 of those maps side by side to fly a single mission across the Iraqi desert to our landing zone, and then crisscross the entirety of that sector of Iraq to fly back to base. 5 of those maps, the size of a poster. And now it's just a part of a display, a history display. Speaking of history displays, in this next picture, we get from items that were used every single day. Well, now they're a part of an archived history. This is a part of an exhibit. This is going to be an enduring part of a global war on terrorism exhibition that has been traveling, but it's going to become a permanent part of the history that Director Dietrich has been so vigilant and so diligent in pursuing in the last couple of years. I'm proud to add this as a permanent part of that Global War on Terrorism exhibit. And I wore that exact same flight suit, both combat tours in Iraq, with the same leather over-the-shoulder holster, both times. And now it just finds a permanent home as a part of Iraq history.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
And this, when you're an old aviator, this is exactly the epitome of every combat mission you ever flew. And I am so grateful to the public affairs NCO who happened to go on that flight set with me that day. We were making a hard left turn out of Baghdad, having just flown away from the diplomatic helipad, right there off the river through the heart of the city. And I'm so grateful to have this particular picture that captures and epitomizes what was my time flying combat missions in Iraq.
Patricia, thank you for sharing those stories with us and those items for our permanent collection. We will do our darndest to be good stewards of your incredible story and your service to the country, your family's service to the country, obviously. So thank you very much. Was curious if anybody had any quick question for Patricia before we hear a story from Wisconsin.
Not so much a question, Randall, but Patricia, that photo with you and your father, that was just marvelous. Like you said, you know, the military is family, whether you are actually related or not. But to be able to serve like that with your father after all his time in service, not to you know, make war seem like a wonderful thing, but just what a marvelous memory that must have been. You have Michael Rodriguez over here. We were talking earlier. He said his son is serving. And I don't know if he ever got a chance to serve alongside. My son is serving as well. We never got to serve together, although we're both armor branch. But our service is just separated by so many years. But just to be able to have that photograph and be able to share that moment with your father, that was just a wonderful, wonderful portion of your presentation.
Thanks, Eric. I really do treasure it.
Rod, had you had a chance to serve with your son?
Actually, no. So I retired just before, but his mother, who also served for 21 years and has got like 5 deployments of hers, they were in service at the exact same time, but there was not a deployment together. But yeah, so I'll talk more about the family service when it's my turn.
Very good. With that said, Eric you've got a story to share with us from Wisconsin. Laura has a remarkable story, I think, 2003 or so, those early days in Iraq, sir?
Yep, she was deployed from April 2003 to July 2004. And this is, the story of Laura Colbert. She served with the 32nd MP Battalion. From Wisconsin, we had almost 4,000 troops that were deployed to Iraq. And amongst the first was this Wisconsin Army National Guard military police unit. And it's kind of coincidental. Laura was just at the museum last week, putting on a presentation for Wisconsin Public Television. So to be able to talk about her story is just really fitting. She and after the presentation was over with, her and I were joking a little bit. We both signed up kind of under the same auspices. It was peacetime. We thought, this would be a really good opportunity to enrich ourselves, serve our country, and just don't have to worry about bullets being fired at you. And lo and behold, although our service is separated by almost identically 10 or almost to the date 10 years, within a couple months of both of our enlistments, the nation's at war and we're being deployed to Iraq. And so I just had a little joke with her about that, about how, you don't really think that you're going to get deployed when you sign up, unless, something is already happening. But just for both of us to kind of have to go through that, I thought was a little coincidental. Laura's service started out, she was a second semester freshman in college here at UW-Madison. Summer was coming up. She really didn't know how she was going to pay for rent, much less other summertime activities. She didn't want to go back home to Wapaka. So she decided to join the Army National Guard, get a little bit of extra paycheck. And like I said, a few months later, the country was at war. She did go on April of 2003 to Iraq. And she said at first, it seemed like a really cool adventure. This is all coming from her oral history and just some of the conversations that I've had with her. She enjoyed what she was doing over there for the most part initially, but she was only supposed to serve 6 months, her unit was. They ended up serving 16 months. They were continuously extended. She said this really took a toll, not only on her, but the rest of the unit as well. It lowered morale a little bit. And it got to the point after their last extension where she said, they had all really looked forward to going home. And by the last extension, they just all felt kind of dead inside. I don't want to say that they were being lied to, but certainly they weren't given the whole truth about when they were supposed to leave. And just being told that you're going to leave now. Oh, nope, sorry, you're going to leave 4 months from now. Oh, sorry, nope, 2 more months. It does take an emotional, it's emotional impact on the soldiers themselves. She worked primarily in an Iraqi police station, getting that up to snuff in Sadr City. But she also worked with regular Army troops as well, going through the different parts of the city. And as she says that she was the one who was kicking down the doors with a rifle in her hand. And the reason that they brought these females along with them is because they also had to search the female civilian population as they were going into these housing areas. So having her along was very instrumental. Although she said it was a little difficult because these Iraqi women really did not respond to her simply because she didn't look like a woman. She had her hair up in her Kevlar. She had her, her body armor on. And so she looked like one of the guys. And so when she would have to have interactions with the women were very hesitant until, she would take her sunglasses off. She would take her Kevlar off. Her hair would come down and they would realize that they're dealing with a woman in the military. And she said that once they realized that they were dealing with a woman, it was still kind of shocking to them to see this military female out doing the job that the men would do. But they responded a lot more positively once they found out this was a woman. And the way the culture is set up over there, it's just, it just made things a lot easier for the jobs that they were doing. Out of the 31 people in her platoon, this is kind of an anomaly. 13 of them were females. So there was a large female population within their platoon. And she said that really helped her through being able to rely on her sisters, being able to talk to them about things that she probably would not be able to talk to men about, or at least not as comfortably. She said that was almost a saving grace for her. She was primarily a Humvee driver when she was not working at the police station. Her Humvee was the lead element in her platoon. And she got the job just simply because she said she was a good driver. Her dad had taught her really well. Her dad was a Vietnam era veteran. Although he didn't serve in Vietnam, he still taught her how to drive really well. And so that's how she got the job of being this Humvee driver. But when she was not driving Humvee, she was carrying a weapon just like everybody else, pulling security missions from rooftops. A couple instances where she had car bombs explode at the police station that she was working at. One was absolutely devastating, destroyed the entire police station, and she had to pull security around the crater. And she has a picture that she puts in her presentations. I wish I could have got it from her. But this crater is absolutely enormous. It's larger than a couple swimming pools. And so when this bomb went off at the police station that she was working at, she said this really drew a crowd. About 4,000 people turned out just to see what was going on, to try to help dig out some of the bodies that were buried in the rubble. And she was positioned on top of a rooftop, providing security from above. And she said it was just very surreal. And this was the first, I mean, she had been fired at before, and she had seen, firefights. She had seen what casualties of war look like, but this was really something that really impacted her. She did suffer from PTSD after her service was over with, once she got back home. And one of the things that she really emphasizes, not only when you're just talking to her, but also if you listen to her presentation, is that everybody's experience over there was completely different.
Another check.
When she was suffering from PTSD, she was wondering, or one of her platoon members was wondering why she wasn't suffering as well. She said, "Laura, you're suffering. How come I'm not suffering? Was there something wrong with me? Is it you?" And Laura just really emphasized that everybody's experience is different over there. And this other service member did actually start suffering PTSD about 5 months after that. So it took a little while to set in. She also served with her brother. Speaking of the family connections, her brother was regular Army stationed in Iraq. I can't recall which infantry division he was with, but they did get a chance to meet once in Baghdad. He was able to come into Baghdad, into the Green Zone, and spend a birthday with her, which was really special. And another thing that she really emphasizes as well is just a woman's experience over there was far different than what maybe a man might, experience. The Iraqi police didn't have much faith in her simply because she was a woman. There was a couple times during firefights where the Iraqi police would try to disarm her because they thought that she's not going to be any good with a weapon and they would be much better with the weapon. So they would try to take her weapon away from her. She resisted, of course, and as any service member would, but just to listen to her story. And not only the kind of, I don't want to say discrimination or sexism, but along those lines was also realized when she got back home as well. And she would go to the VA hospital to be treated for her PTSD. And as she was checking in, the nurse or whatever would say, "Well, who are you here to see? What's your service member's name that you're here to visit?" And she's like, "No, I am the service member. I am the one with the problem. I need some help." So just being able to finally overcome those barriers, I think, is a great step. We see this time and time again throughout military history, beginning in World War I with Navy nurses. But it seems like every conflict that women are involved in, they take one more step forward and they're able to solidify their position within the military. I just would like to say in closing that one of the ways that she dealt with her PTSD was to write. And she did write a book, and it is available out there. It's called How to Pee Standing Up, an alarming memoir of combat and coming back home. And the reason she titled it that was because when you are on security detail, when you're standing on a rooftop, when you're trying to control a crowd that is very hostile toward you, for women, it's a little more difficult to go to the restroom. So she developed a way, she carried a funnel that she bought from Farm and Fleet and was able to relieve herself that way, as she taught herself how to pee standing up. And so it seems kind of comical, but at the same time, it really just speaks to the difficulties that she faced while she was over in Iraq.
Thank you, Eric. I would love to have the chance to meet with her on a future Zoom call.
We can certainly arrange that. Like I said, she spoke at the museum last week. We'd had this plan for many months. Had that not been the case, she very well could be sitting here talking to you about her personal experiences rather than me trying to convey them through what I know of her.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, with Patricia's story and her is important that we make sure that we are doing our best to tell the full story, the diversity of stories out there, to kind of continue in the same vein that you started. Couple one suggested reading list page. You just heard a good one from Eric that you should check out. Came just across a couple of pieces of writing that I thought were pretty compelling and wanted to share with you. On the right, a new book by Melvin Leffler. For sure, there's all manner of books written about the political campaign of Operation Iraqi Freedom. If you're interested in revisiting kind of the political conversation leading up to that, I found Melvin's book that just came out at the end of February to be at least in my estimation, and everybody's estimation is going to be different, but in my estimation, an even-handed approach to what the country was actually thinking back then, prior to the decision to go into Iraq. That just came out, and it's actually been pretty well reviewed, at least in the historical circle. And we're at that point now, 20 years removed, where the history and the books that are written about it is becoming more important. So the story that we will hold and carry forward and pass on is now being kind of debated and talked about. And this book is one that I think will be at the forefront as we move forward on a far different level. JP Lawrence was on our call here earlier. He did, I think he's maybe still here, but I read his article in Stars and Stripes just the other day. You should check it out. Goes to some of that complexity. You heard Eric talk about the PTSD that service members can suffer, and his article does a nice job of just creating a number of different perspectives, obviously about this Operation Iraqi Freedom and what it did mean on an individual level. JP does a nice job of speaking to that in this article. JP, are you still with us?
Yes, hello from Germany. I'm a bit sick and it's a bit late, but I'm glad to hear from everyone.
Well, we're super happy to hear from you. Actually, our gratitude for joining us from Germany, for sticking with us by not feeling well, and for doing all that you do in Stars and Stripes and your prior military service to tell the story. You're writing the first draft of history here in these articles and others. I know General Votel is quoted in this article. Welcome. Wanted to give you a chance just to reflect a little bit on your own writing and your own service and the 20-year anniversary, sir.
Thank you. I'll be short. I think I was really impressed by talking with Paul Braun, who is also a Minnesota veteran. I was really impressed because he has kept up with your friends in Iraq and people from Iraq. And I think that's a very laudable level of engagement for a veteran to go to Iraq and just continue to have it in his thoughts and just continue to be talking with the people there over multiple years after. And yeah, I think just keeping in touch with Iraq, talking for people to Iraq has been a very interesting thing for me as well. And I think it's really helped contextualize a lot of things, especially the stuff that happened after the surge. Really been great to hear from people from Iraq, and hopefully, as Paul Braun said, we'll be able to go as tourists someday.
Well, thank you, JP. Really do enjoy your writing and your reporting. Please do keep it up. You provide a vital service for service members and folks here stateside, conveying these stories. So thank you again very, very much for jumping on here and sharing your perspectives with us. Let's please stay in touch as we move forward. And with all of that, we can't gather on the 20th anniversary and hear Patricia's stories about the first photograph she saw of her unit in tears a few minutes before joining in friendship to remember, even with JP's reporting, what the Pentagon identifies as 4,599 U.S. service members killed in Operation Iraqi Freedom. So that shouldn't go missed and should be reflected upon all of us, representing, no doubt, every state, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and nationwide. And how those that we lost are memorialized and remembered is a chance for Rod Rodriguez and General Joseph Votel to tell us a little bit more, or a lot more, about a national memorial on the mall in DC, which, as I've done dozens and dozens of interviews with post 9/11 veterans, I know is of keen interest. So how this is going to happen is something that I think we're interested in, and the chance to hear from Rod, who is the CEO and president of the foundation charged with making it happen, and General Votel, a board member on the national level. Thank you for joining us, gentlemen.
Oh, thank you for having us.
I'd love to, for starters, could you just share with us your perspectives? How did you get involved respectively? Rod, could you go first, please?
Sure, of course. So it was the foundation, it came together in 2015. It was just some like-minded veterans and family members. There's several people kind of just trying to figure this out. They kind of just flagged themselves one underneath one foundation. I ran into them in 2016. I was at an event providing remarks, and they came up to me and they're like, "Rod, hey, we need help." I'm like, "Who are you? What you doing?" Right. And they told me, and the reason is that what they mentioned was, this is a long and arduous process. If we don't start now, I mean, when are we going to start? And then the first people I thought of were my grandfathers. So both World War II veterans, one passed before his memorial was built, and the other was unable to travel. So when I thought about it, and at that point in 2015, if you look at some of the senior leadership, at that point, we had some of them in the 70s, they were 70 years old at that point. So I was like, yeah, you got me. I mean, what can I do? So that I joined the board in 2016.
General Votel, how did you, were you invited to join?
Thanks. First off, Randall, good evening and to everybody, and great stories to get us started. I'm really glad to join you again, especially to be here with Rod to talk a little bit about the Memorial Foundation. I got involved in this particular project after a good friend of mine who was associated with one of the organizations that I'm working with reached out to me and told me about it and invited me to be a part of it. And of course, thinking about what we're trying to do here, create a national monument to recognize those who have served in the global war on terrorism. To do that in our nation's capital, I think everyone can appreciate the impact that something like that will have. And so the opportunity to be a part of that, and of course, having served in a variety of capacities throughout the global war on terrorism, was a real motivator for me. And like many of you, having spent a lot of time looking at visiting the memorials in Washington D.C., you can't help but appreciate how these inspire people and how they educate people and how they inform people about our country, and more important, about the people that make up our country. So, for me, an opportunity to be a part of this was really just too good of an opportunity to pass up. And so I've been very, very glad to join. I hope to play an important role in supporting Rod and helping see this project through to fruition.
Well, thank you for serving in that capacity, General. Nice to have a Minnesota voice on the national level. And yes, I think, again, looking forward as we are 20 years back, how we look forward is largely going to be shaped by, as is our national tradition, that memorial on the mall. It will be the focal point of how all this is remembered. Yeah, of course, none of that happens easily. It seems like probably a complicated process in some ways, and serious thought has to be given to this. Rod and Joe, would you just mind speaking to some of the things, for background at least, the legislation that made it possible and how you're defining global war on terror?
Absolutely. So one of the let's talk about when I joined the team in 2016, and I'll kind of provide the history. But before I go into that, I want to talk about General Votel and what he is. So the friend that he referenced is a very good friend of mine as well. And I remember General Votel. I used to work for the gentleman at one point in my career. We're from the same community. But I remember General Votel was one of the very first, and I think the first senior military leader, senior leader anywhere to actually come out and encourage, men and women serving in uniform. Like, look, there's nothing wrong with post-traumatic stress. There's nothing wrong with going to counseling. And that was General Votel. Or he did an interview, and I've shared this with him, and I hope I'm not overstepping, but that just him doing that had significant impact within the special operations community. Guys like me, I was a Green Beret, and my community, you guys just suck it up, keep going. But not just me, my Frogman brothers and our little Marine brothers, and all the Super Air Force cats. I mean, everybody's just like, nope, keep going, because we drive each other. But when General Votel did that, I will say to everyone, and I've said it before, he saved a lot of lives.
Thank you.
So I was like, how do we get General Votel on this board?
Clearly, sir.
Yes.
Clearly.
So if you can go to that slide, and I'll start talking. So here's where we go. I don't want to get too much into the bureaucratic process to build this. So what I try to explain to people with what we do is I want everybody in here to try and imagine the most incredibly complex building project you can imagine, actually art project. Okay, significant art project that everybody has input on the most controlled and expensive real estate in the nation. Now I want you to throw on a few coats, actually let's say about 20 coats of bureaucracy and politics. So that's kind of what we do. So it's important to note that the nation did not have its very first national war memorial until November of 1982, which was the building of the Vietnam Wall. If everybody pauses for a second and thinks about that, like, wait a minute, we existed as a nation for 206 years before we as a nation on our front lawn recognized the brave men and women that served, fought, and died. It's kind of a shame, in my opinion. So that's how, so when people look at the Vietnam, and those that are familiar with that process, they did it very quickly. After that was done, there was something called the Commemorative Works Act of 1986. And this is where this created this framework that I'm going to reference here in a minute. And in that Commemorative Works Act of 1986, they stated that a war has to be over for a period of 10 years before a national war memorial can be built. And I don't fault them for writing that law in 1986. There's no way anyone in this nation could have forecasted we'd be in a multi-generational conflict with no clear end in sight. Nobody could have. So, all right. So our first step, that little group of veterans that I joined in 2016, was to pass a bill to get an exemption from the Commemorative Works Act of 1986. So that's what we sought out to do. We sought some veterans that were serving on Capitol Hill. In the House, we had Representative Gallagher from the great state of Wisconsin. Then we had Seth Moulton. We were sure to cover both sides of the aisle, because what we do is apolitical. It's nonpartisan. You're not going to see anything that we say as bipartisan. That implies sides. There's no sides to what we do. And then, so we went to the Senate, and we were able to get Senator Joni Ernst, and who's a veteran, but then Senator Joe Manchin actually jumped in to help us out. We introduced that bill in February to seek an exemption in February of 2017, late February, and it swept through the House and Senate, and President Trump signed it in August of 2017. And we, at that point, this little fledgling group of veterans with no money or influence or really anything, became the congressionally designated nonprofit tasked with organizing, building, and coordinating the National War Memorial. Effectively, we were handed the staff at that moment. It only is us. Nobody else can come in. No, that's it. This foundation. So what happened then was shortly after that, I was fortunate to work with, have a close relationship with one of our former commanders in chief, and realized what we needed to do. I stepped into the leadership role in 2018, and then and I'm going to talk about this, which is why we had to pass another bill. So, and this is going to go to one of the other questions, Randall, but I think it's to cover it right now because you have both of both of our bills that we passed. So go back one more. I'm sorry. So Public Law 115-51 authorizes the establishment of the memorial or exemption. So what was going to happen is what everybody on here, for those of you familiar with Washington, D.C., you'd consider the National Mall, right? Where all the memorials are built, you know, from the White House to the Jefferson, from the Lincoln to the Capitol Hill. You say, hey, that's the mall. That's where you think it would go. Well, that space is actually called the Reserve. And in 2003, Congress deemed it a finished work of art and forbade any new construction. Now, there's been some improvements, there's been some additions, but nothing new has been authorized. There was stuff that was grandfathered in at the MLK, but they had their site before this law was passed. So me, as just a regular veteran, I'm like, I think it belongs there, but again, I'm just the leader of this foundation. It's not my mission. You know, I'm not an expert on the global war on terrorism. I'm an expert on my experience. I'm an expert on my son. I'm an expert on us. So I've never done that. So what we did was we conducted discussion groups across the country, speaking with Gold Stars, veterans, active duty service members. I'm fortunate. I live right outside Fort Bragg. Went on base for a few days, spoke with veterans, and we wanted to know, hey, where do you think it should go? And they were educated. If you think it belongs where all the others are, that's called the Reserve. That means that we have to go back to Capitol Hill and pass another bill. If you're cool with it going outside the Reserve, which is called Area 1, then okay, that's what we'll do. That would be our charge. We spoke to the people of America. And if you think about it, the last two notable memorials that have gone up are the Eisenhower Memorial, which is behind the Air and Space Museum, as well as the World War I Memorial, which is over in Pershing Park. Beautiful, serene, it's amazing. It should belong there. It's General Pershing's Park, but how many people are we going to go there? I mean, it's beautiful, but you got to think about the impact and engagement. So we did this for 8 months. Overwhelmingly, the people said no, that it would be kind of silly to build it elsewhere. And then we found out our legislators assumed it was going there anyway. Obviously, it was a much later Congress. So at that point, we were like, all right, I guess we got to go back to Capitol Hill. So we met with the bureaucratic agencies that control this space. They're called the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, the National Capital Planning Commission, and the Commission of Fine Arts. I met with them. We're completely transparent and open in everything we do. And I stated, look, we're going to seek an exemption to build it in the Reserve. They're like, Rod, you can't. And I knew if we passed a bill, we could. I'm like, are you saying we're not allowed, or you don't think I can do it? And they're like, Rod, you can't. And no one's been able to do it. It'll take you 10 to 15 years, cost you tens of millions of dollars. We're going to fight you every step of the way because they're doing what Congress told them, nothing new. And no offense, it's not going to happen. I said, but if we pass a bill, we can do this, right? And they're like, yes, of course. I said, okay, just letting you know. I ended the meeting. It was a 10-minute meeting. 3.5 years later, President Biden signed our bill into law, granting authorization to build it within the reserve space of the National Mall. At which point, the month later, I met back with them, and they were like, "Hey, well done. Let's get to work." And that was in January of last year. So we had to pass 2 bills to get to where we are today. You know, the foundation was 2015, received the authorization in 2017. We passed our bill in 2021. Now we're kind of back on the train tracks of the 24-step process to build this memorial. And currently we're in steps of site selection right now. So so I just want to have to frame those bills. Like, why are they passing bills to do this? I kind of have to tell a little bit, and that's the Reader's Digest version. I could talk for hours on this stuff. So let's talk about what this memorial is and what the definition is. So on September 18th, the authorization and use of military force was signed in 2001, and every single administration has used that to wage war on terrorism. So that's what we say, you know, and that's what it is. So we can go to the next slide real quick. So in December, at the end of 2022, the National Defense Service Medal they stopped giving it out, right? And there was this big misunderstanding or misinterpretation of what that meant to the veteran community, particularly with the fact of when we pulled out of Afghanistan. Oh, we're not in war anymore. We're not at war. No, I am telling you, we still have brave men and women out there serving, fighting in harm's way to do this. You know, the 2 of the most notable ones occurred in January, where we captured a couple HVTs up in Syria, and then I believe January 25th, maybe 23rd. I have my dates off, but We hit a cave complex in northern Somalia conducted by SOF forces and took out 11 bad guys, right? So we still have men and women out there serving and fighting. And what I tried to do to explain to not just the bureaucratic agencies that we have to go through, but even to the veteran population, and I would really love for everyone to take this piece with them, is that the Global War on Terrorism Service Medal and the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal are still being awarded. So I want you to think about that. Like for those that served in Vietnam, like, Obanshi 6 down there, like your pops, he has a Vietnam campaign medal, just like my father does, who's a Vietnam veteran. For my grandfathers, they had their campaign medals. That's what this is. And that is how we don't make up anything. We just share the data that's out there. And to this date, they are still using the authorization of use of military force to conduct this. Now, there's something that just came up in the Senate. There's a resolution to rescind that. And that's not to get into all that, but that's what it is. But so if you look at these are just some of the named operations that are, as well as the locations that these operations have been conducted. Everybody needs to also understand that operations, let's talk about Afghanistan, those weren't in Iraq, those weren't two separate wars, they're two separate theaters. Nobody considers Operation Overlord a separate war, right? That was the D-Day invasion. So why would we consider Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation New Dawn, and such other wars? No, and the general will tell you, named operations are in support of an effort, and that's why all of our operations across the globe are named different operations. So you can see right here that that it is in a global in its nature. So that's kind of how we're to answer to the two or to address the two bills we had to pass, and really what we are doing to this. And in addition to this, I'll add one more thing. We seek to build the most broad, diverse, inclusive, and engaging, interactive memorial that has ever been built. Let's talk about the World War or the Vietnam Memorial for a second. 1982, the wall was built. 1984, the three soldiers were built. 1992, the Women's Vietnam Memorial was built. And then in 2004, there was a plaque that was added to honor all those that lost the war at home, whether it's through illness or other reasons, through, post-traumatic stress. I think everyone can agree here is probably taking more of us than anything. So those are 4 different efforts over a period of about 22 years. We seek to do that at once. So, but with this inclusive nature, I'm not just using that, people like to use that like broad, diverse, and inclusive, because that's what you have to say these days, but this is what it means. So, like I said, I know a lot of, this is what I do 24/7, 365 for the past 7 years. I know during some of my deployments, I served alongside, wearing the same stuff I did. The weapons might have been a little bit different, but they were Americans, just not military. One of them is actually an ambassador for the foundation, John Patwa. We call him Gunner. Gunner was an FBI guy, a super SWAT guy, one of them, attached to my special forces detachment. And when we hit breach point and set things off, he may not have been number 1 or in the initial stack, but Gunner went in and he had a different job once that site was secure. But why aren't we recognizing that? And if you really want to think about it, the first KIA in the Global War on Terrorism was not a uniformed service member. It was Johnny Michael Spann. Yes, Johnny, Michael, he went by Michael, was a Marine at one point, but he was killed. He was part of Team Alpha, the very first ones into Afghanistan, and he worked for Special Activities Division. Why don't we talk about that? We don't. No memorial has ever addressed the entire story. So now this is very unique. So it's an incredibly complex and dynamic story. So we are including everyone. Now here's a statistic. I'll buy you a Coke if anybody in here knows this. But in 2019, the Department of Labor did the best they could to find out how many non-uniformed service members lost their lives serving in the Global War on Terrorism. Now, for those of us that stepped foot on a battlefield, I remember my first deployment in Somalia. The cooks were military. The cooks were, I was there in Somalia, my cook was a military guy, but as things transitioned, during my deployments, once things were secure, and even in the initial stages of the war, we had KBR workers, we had other people, supply trains, we had other people maybe doing some different operations as well. But, no one ever talks about that. The earliest they started collecting that data was Desert Storm, and the ratio of non-uniformed individuals to uniformed individuals was 50-1. Today is 1-to-1 and sometimes 1-to-2. So Department of Labor Hey, how many have we lost? Now, I don't dispute statistics with everybody, but I just say north of 7,000 uniformed service members have lost their life in the global war on terrorism. We are over 3,400 non-uniformed individuals. I want you to pause again for a second, and I want you to call to mind those families, the tens, hundreds, if not millions of individuals that have been impacted that no one ever talks about, that we don't address as a nation. This nation went to war in a multitude of capacities, an incredibly complex war that really, even veterans, all the veterans on this call right now are like, oh, I never really, wow, what is that? Like, even sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We don't ever really talk about the nature of that. So that's the nature, and we are honoring that. In addition to, this is where I want to talk about the family. Never have we existed as a nation where our sons and daughters watch their mothers and fathers go off to fight in a war, to only grow up during a time of war to go fight the same enemy. I have no idea what it would have been like for my father to watch me graduate airborne school and go fight the Viet Cong any more than I could imagine it would be like for my grandfather to watch my father finish his artillery training out there, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and go fight the Nazis who served in the Pacific. My son, who's in the 82nd right now, he's got 7 years in, he was 4 years old when the towers fell. Those are his earliest memories. All he knows is dad. Remember I said mom was in the Army too. We both served for 21 years. All he knows is dad and mom were just high-fiving each other, doing what it is they got to do. And he's doing that, and the most difficult deployment for me, the reason I say all that is the most difficult deployment for me weren't the 10 that I did. It was that day here at Fort Bragg on Green Ramp, where I'm standing there watching my then 19-year-old 82nd Airborne Infantry, paratrooper, a much stronger, smarter version than I. I'm giving him that hug before they leave, that hug of hope. There's his mother. She's still in uniform, giving him that hug. And then we watch our son deploy to the Helmand province of Afghanistan as an 82nd Airborne Infantryman to perform what's called the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force mission. He's going to fight. I had spent time in Helmand province twice. His mother had spent time in the Helmand province as well. So that for me, like, broke me in half like a shotgun. I mean, that was the most difficult point for me. So in addition to recognizing everyone's service, we're going to address the family service as well, because everybody who has a family and has stepped foot on a battlefield knows the families serve as well. So that's a broad, diverse, and inclusive nature. And the 4 tenets, thank you, man, you're right on time. The 4 tenets that are guiding us are honor, heal, empower, honor, heal, empower, salute. Honor, heal, empower, and unite are the tenets that guide everything that it is we do. We honor, I talked about everyone that we're honoring. Healing has a lot of different meanings for a lot of different people, but provide that opportunity as a nation to do that. If you want to think about for a second what occurred at Abbey Gate, where did everybody gather? There was 11 Marines, one Army PSYOPer who happened to be one of my son's best friends that went on that deployment I just referenced before he went to go be PSYOP, and the Navy corpsmen. They went to the Iwo Jima Memorial. That's amazing, but we don't have anywhere to gather. So heal and empower and to tell those stories. I applaud you guys for doing this and telling the stories, but we don't as a nation have an opportunity to do so, and we will provide that. And then unite and remind everybody what this nation is, and really who we are as a people. We're the United States military particularly is the most broad, diverse, inclusive organization that exists. That's a snapshot, that less than 1%, that's a snapshot of the 99, and that's still who we are as a people. That was a lot.
You want to talk about the sites that you've been exploring, sir?
Sure.
16 sites initially identified, I believe, if I'm tracking this right.
Absolutely. So if you see that red line, remember I talked about the reserve, that's everything inside. So you can imagine where this thing would have ended up going. It was really going to end up in the fabric of the city. So really, really happy to do this. So what we did was these sites aren't arbitrary sites. There's something called Memorials and Museums Master Plan that was written over 20 years ago. And these sites were designated. It was something that was the federal government contracted Leeway Daily, a very large architectural firm, to forecast development. And they wrote this report over 20 years ago. So these are sites that were pre-established. We weren't just like throwing darts or, hey, this place will be good. These are pre-established. As I said, this is some very controlled real estate here. So we also looked at outside, just to be good stewards to the NCMEC, national, the alphabet soup agencies I referenced earlier. But yes, we started with these, and based off of excuse me, our program, we needed to see would this be applicable and a good fit for the foundation. Excuse me. Apologize for that. I was talking a lot. So then what we did was we we got rid of a lot of them. Not be like, I don't like that one, is for they wouldn't fit, they wouldn't support the program. What is the program? What is this memorial going to do? What does it mean? How's it going to engage people? Because we don't know what it's going to look like yet. So, and then also based off of construction, future construction and development. So if you look at, if you look south of the Lincoln Memorial, that little X right there, the reason we got rid of that one is we selected that site because of some sewage overhaul and some things. We could not begin construction until 2035. So we threw that one out, right? No, that's not going to work for us. So we got rid of that one. There's an example. The BC oval you see right there, what we did was we merged two separate sites, and you'll see that in a subsequent slide. So we go to the next slide. Then we got it down to 5 sites, and you see those two. There's one in the tidal basin, just north of the Thomas Jefferson, and then you see the other one at the top, just close, just north of the Washington Monument. We got rid of those because of the thematic nexus and nature. That's a word I've learned doing this. Thematic nexus and nature of these spaces that was not appropriate for the tidal basin. If you look at who's there, you got FDR, MLK, Thomas Jefferson. They were just like, no, it's just wouldn't be a fit. And then the other one, there's some security concerns with that. That is a major thoroughfare for the President of the United States of America. We've all seen the security bubbles in various buildings kind of increase and grow. That site is shut down several times throughout the year for security concerns. So why would we build something that you can't even go see? Much like the 1st Division Memorial, which is on the White House grounds. It's beautiful, it's magnificent, but you can't go see it. It's behind the security. So why would we do that? So we got rid of that one. So I'm going to talk about the 3 sites that we end up. This is Potomac River, site J. So these are just some visuals there. And the memorial itself is going to be about a 1/4 acre. That's the memorial itself. Let's just call it the structure. But then there's going to have a 1 acre setting and then a 2.5 acre kind of a buffer zone. So it's going to be a 2.5 acre site, really, that nothing will really intrude upon. So just for site reference, you'll see one kind of with something you could recognize as far as comparing it to what that means. Reason we chose this one was a lot of sight lines that connect to the Air Force Memorial, the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Arlington House, and actually from this site on a clear day in the winter and late fall months, you can actually see section 60, which is where the uniformed service members that have been, interred at Arlington are buried. It is inside the 500-year floodplain. We don't need to go into that. I said, I'll try and keep this surface level. Can we go to the next slide? The next one we're going to go talk about is Constitution Gardens. It's very serene. It's a very underutilized spot. It sits in a low ground. It's very quiet. It's very quiet aside from a lot of the goose droppings you'll find there. There's a water feature. It's just a really, really magnificent site. So let's go to the next slide. And from here, you can kind of see where it is. So there is a direct sight line to the Signers Memorial, which is a memorial. If you guys have been to DC, have never seen this before, I urge you to go there. The reason the thematic connection there is there's some constitutionality questions that are brought up quite often with this. As a matter of fact, I just referenced the Senate resolution and that's going in for the AUMS. So there's a connection there. But then, what was really impactful for me was the proximity to the Vietnam Women's Memorial. We have women serving in capacities and women have always been in combat. I mean, when I was in Somalia, there were women there. It's just like it's been going on since man has been fighting. So, but this right here would give us the opportunity to highlight it that much more. Like I said, as my son's mother served for 21 years, and I saw firsthand a lot of the the non-recognition of service that she did, and she's seen more combat, a lot of dudes I know. So it is what it is, right? And it's a shame, so that you can see the connection there. And it stays out of the sight line from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial directly to the Washington Memorial, so that it's right on axis. So we didn't want to intrude on anything. Let me go to the next slide. Now we're going to talk about Constitution Avenue. Constitution Avenue and 23rd is the site we're calling it. You can kind of see the impact in area. It is a panel that just sits out there. It's beautiful. It's in the shadow of the Lincoln. This was a site that was the Vietnam Veterans Center, Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Was going to build an interpretation center here, but they were said they had to go underground. You don't want to mess with the vista of the Lincoln. I respect that. There was a lot of stuff in there, and unfortunately, they were not able to do that. So it's not like it went back on the market. It's just a matter of like, you know, they weren't able to succeed, and we identified this site. So you can kind of see that occupation of this one would be the only thing on that entire block, aside from the kiosk that would be located south of there. Sight lines we can see right here, either on axis with the Desert Storm Memorial, which is going across the street. They break ground this summer with the Vietnams, or just off, maybe just north of it. You know, we don't know exactly quite where it's going to go, but this is the general location. Obviously, you have sight lines to Lincoln Memorial. You can see Arlington Sari, but I think this is one of the sight lines I'm really. You can also see the State Department is right up the street. Obviously, we lost State Department personnel in the global war on terrorism. There's no question about that. They've served in a number of different capacities, so their service will be recognized as well. But then also the United States Institute of Peace. I get a lot of stuff like, Rod, why do we have another war memorial? I said, well, I will tell you from a warfighter's perspective, every memorial I see every war memorial is a memorial to peace. It takes war to get to peace. You have to fight for peace. Peace isn't just a thing. And fortunate being able to engage with the USIP, and they're incredibly excited. So that connection will provide us another opportunity to engage and educate a lot of people. Here's a better view of what a quarter acre is, the 1 acre and the buffer. Obviously, we're not going into the street, but just kind of have an idea of how the size of this memorial. And the unique aspect of this site right here would provide the opportunity for continuing engagement. You know, I envision, hundreds, if not 1,000 chairs sitting out there, block streets and everybody out there for our groundbreaking ceremony, which we're hoping to secure. I'm gonna give you guys some dates. We're gonna have a site 2023. And then we get into the design process, which is about an 18 to 24 month process that would take us to 2025 to get that approved. And then we can start digging. And then that's about everything takes like 18 to 24 months to build in Washington, D.C. So that takes us to 2027. So 23 site, 25 design, unveiling, and construction initiation. 2027 is our current goal for dedication.
That's breathtaking. Isn't it? They picked the right man for the job, or you've done a nice job of growing into the position over the last 7 years, sir.
Yeah, it's something that, like, building an National War Memorial or museum, because the Smithsonian has 3 efforts right now. To build museums, they go through the exact same steps that we do, through the same committees that we do, the commissions, excuse me. They do everything. So unless you're involved in this, it's something you have to learn. So I remember I mentioned the Memorials and Museums Master's Plan that was contracted by Leeway Daily. So when I stepped in the leadership role, I was like, I'm a retired Army guy. I'm just I don't know anything about any of this stuff. I learned, I read, I research, but what I wanted to know is who wrote the Memorials and Museums Master's Plan. Not Leeway Daily, that's a company, but who are the architects that wrote it? And fortunately, Michael Winstanley, a guy, he's a senior project manager and writer. He hung out at Shingle, Alexandria. So I hired Michael Winstanley. And then just over a year ago, I brought on his co-author, Alan Harwood. So the guys wrote the stuff. So that's kind of what's, I'm not going to take credit for any of our successes. My job as the CEO is just to keep us as an azimuth and build the team that we need to succeed as we reach, certain objectives to move forward, like I referenced General Votel.
Boy, General Votel, the $1 million questions here, besides the groundbreaking date and the unveiling date, any idea what it's going to cost? Now it's going to be paid for.
Well, I think Rod can probably give you the total cost of this, but this can be paid for by the American people. I mean, meaning through donations and contributions that we're going to work to obtain to support the vision that Rod outlined here and create this really important memorial. You know, I think a lot of Americans may not appreciate that. This isn't all tax dollars paying for this. This is private. A lot of these are private donations and contributions from a variety of different sources that actually make these dreams come true. So, you know, part of my job, and as we kind of get into this, along with other members of the board and the broader public here, is to raise awareness of what we're trying to accomplish here, and then hopefully generate the support that makes this come to fruition.
So I'll talk about the price tag. So let's talk about existing memorials. So let's talk about the World War II Memorial and the Martin Luther King Memorial, which is 20 years ago. The World War II Memorial cost $200 million. The Martin Luther King Memorial costs $120 million. You do the math, supply chain issues, inflation. So we've set a very conservative fundraising goal right now of $100 million. Now let's talk about that. Let's just say, hypothetically, once we don't know exactly what it is because we don't have a site. You know, I don't know what's underground there. We don't have a design. I don't know what that's going to cost to build. So what we did was we worked with existing construction companies that were out there. Hey, let's just talk about some hypotheticals. What can we come up with? And then we got to $100 million based off the quarter acre, half acre, two half acre, radius that we showed you guys. But one important thing to note is, let's just say for easy math, it costs $100 million to the cent. We have to, before we stick one shovel in the ground, open up our books, the National Park Service, because it's going to belong to them. This is a Department of Interior, it belongs to them. We have to open our books and say, look, we have 10% overage of total construction costs. So we have to say, we have $110 million in the bank, not promised, in the bank, because, and I respect that. They don't want someone to dig a big hole and then oh man, we're broke, we can't do it, and walk away, right? Because it's just going to cost them a little bit more taxpayer money. So if it is $100 million, we have to raise $110 million. And in addition to that, we have to think about the endowment because we are positioned like no other memorial has ever been, is where, we've challenged everyone, even those commissions that I've referenced. I've found that I've challenged everybody on just the general notion and concept of what a memorial is. Like, and then there's a few examples, but not a lot of people know. So what about the unfinished aspect of it? Well, I want to talk about a memorial to women's suffrage that exists in the United States Capitol. It is a sculpture, you have very notable women that ensured women, to get women the rights they deserve. But that sculpture is incomplete. So there's the unfinished aspect of it. There's an example. There are also that exist across the world. There are memorials to communism, which is a concept and, an oppressive, tool, but they exist. So we've challenged people to kind of retool it. There's no bookends to this. So it's, in essence, we're building a memorial to the future, and that's nothing that's ever been done in our nation's capital. And I'll give you an example. Apple trees make apples, right? Everyone here who served probably has a family member that served. I've mentioned, my eldest son, his mom, my youngest son, that's all he's known. He's watched his dad, his brother, his mother. And this little hombre is 100% dead set on serving. So it's his memorial, depending on what he does and where he goes. So that challenges everyone's concept. Like, what is a memorial? How do you do that? How do you grasp that? And the only way we can do that is through art. That's why I reference this thing as a piece of art. Each of us can look at a painting or a sculpture or something, and I may love it, you may hate it, but it represents this, and that's what it is, going forward. So there's a lot that we are doing, and I'm going to talk about it was one of your questions. I'll talk about the engagement piece. We're not going to build an interpretive center. We were lucky to get this. There's no space for that. I'm definitely not digging underground. That construction project I referenced with the Vietnam, it was like a $300 million thing. It's not going to happen. No, not going to happen. But something, sparked my thoughts, as I've learned and watched and read, and I've seen what everyone else has done. I see all the giant shoulders that I'm standing on. I referenced the other memorials, and I've seen where there's been, I won't say missteps, but where lessons were learned. On November 1982, when they dedicated the Vietnam Wall, nobody there could have even thought of, at that moment, 40 years from that day, I can go there with some Star Trek device in my hand and find my cousin, Andres Moreno Jr. on that wall. So the digital layer is really where we're going to be going with this and taking that. And if, not to spill all the beans here, but that's where it's going to go with the engagement piece and really take it to a completely different level. For example, like the people leave stuff at the Vietnam Wall all the time. They have currently two warehouses, and you can go on their site and find the things. And I have things of mine, the friends and everything. I have a lot of sacred items. Why should I leave it there when I could create a virtual capsule, take a photo, leave it, and the family can see it, I can see it, we can talk about it, we can create a community digitally. I'm not sure how familiar people are with the metaverse and everything that exists, but there's a lot of stuff out there that I pushed the team, like, no, we need to think. I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I will bring smart people into the room to do this. And here's something that's very interesting. So the Holocaust Museum is another thing that really sparked my interest to start getting AI involved at some point. Holocaust Museum has a storehouse of audio recordings from Holocaust survivors. They've digitized them, and it is their hopes that in the future, one of us can go visit the Holocaust Museum, and through the use of AI, I can have a real-time conversation with a Holocaust survivor based off the banks of questions and answers that they've received over the years. Think about that, right? I can go have a conversation based off the stories collected by everyone around here. How's this? And 20, 30 years from now, some schools can have a field trip there. I want to talk to a veteran that did this. I want to talk to a female aviator, and they're going to get, a lot of Banshee 6 stories, right? I want to talk to whatever. And those are just some concepts right now. But like I said, I don't want to spill all the beans. I've got some pretty big brains in this room to help guide us forward.
That sounds remarkable and something to look forward to. And for sure, we will be doing just that. Any question from our audience tonight?
Thank you.
Mark?
No question, just thank you.
Oh.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., so it's exciting for me to see these places with a future.
Agreed.
Yeah, well, as a resident, I will tell you that, let's talk about design real quick. The design itself, everyone's been telling me, obviously, anybody do something that's never been done. Hey, Rod, this is how you do it. Well, have you done it? Like, what are you talking about? Right. So I get a lot of advice, and I love it because it makes me think about different ways forward. So everyone has always told me, Rod, you need to come up with a design now because it's easier to fundraise. And that's true. It is, absolutely. Other efforts have done that. Outside of upsetting all the bureaucrat agencies, I just don't think it's fitting, because we seek to add to the space. We're not running there kicking people over and planting a flag. It should add to the beauty of our nation's front lawn, which is the reserve, the sacred space in our nation's capital. So I've been very adamant against that, and I've pushed back any suggestions we've ever had from that, because the location is going to affect the design as much as the design is going to affect the location, and those go hand in hand. I don't have a site yet, and as an artist myself, I do some different stuff. It would be arrogant of us to do that, and I refuse. I've refused to do that. So and a lot of the residents, and not just residents, but people, when you think about it like that, like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to be sure that it has to fit. It's something you're going to drive by and it belongs there. And so that's, bring that up for you.
Rod, thank you so much for sharing this. Trust us, we're going to stay on top of this. I know there's 40,000 more than 40,000 post 9/11 veterans in Minnesota, and what you're working on is important. And we do hope to stay in touch. We appreciate your time this evening. General Votel, thank you for participating tonight, and more importantly, for your leadership on the national level on something this important. It's our gratitude, I hope, is sincere and obvious that you've stepped up in this way. Just to round out our evening with a couple of final slides for you, and I'll let you go. And again, we will be in touch moving forward. But Rod, you can be sure that I'll be watching you on every virtual presentation you give in DC, as I have been for the last 6 months. We here in Minnesota are working something of a memorial ourselves, which is a new Veterans Museum at Camp Ripley. So I can commiserate with your questions on what do things cost and site design and development. We're blessed to have a great architect, HGA, on our team developing these plans for us. Mark Ritchie being our board president. Our plans are to break ground this summer and open to the public in 2025 with a new 40,000 square foot facility at Camp Ripley in the heart of the state on 32 acres. Adjacent to one of the busiest highways in the summertime in all of Minnesota, to engage, to your point, your question, your comment, engagement, so being so important. So, and a museum dedicated to all service branches is very important to us. And as Patricia Baker had pointed out in her comments, a permanent gallery space in this 40,000 square foot facility that we're working to fundraise on and keep costs down and watch supply chains is, the first in the state. A gallery dedicated to Patricia Baker and the other 40,000 plus Minnesotans that can gather in this place as a memorial in many ways, being again right across the street from the State Veteran Cemetery. So it's a large task that we're up to. Having you lead the way, Rod and General Votel, we will follow what you do and do our best with it. But we're looking forward to it here at the state level and invite you to come back and see it here in a couple of years. Our work with the Wisconsin Veterans Museum is going to continue. I know Don Patton is on this call. Don Patton's son, who I know he's terribly proud of, and I've gotten to know, and he's as nice of a man as Don Patton is. He's going to be presenting on a virtual roundtable in April, along with Brigadier General Dan Gabrielli, talking about Operation Allies Refuge. In this case, Colonel Jeff Patton being stationed in Germany, receiving those allies that were being evacuated from Kabul airport, and Dan Gabrielli, Brigadier General, being in New Mexico, processing those allies once they arrive back here. They will be the topic and our presenters on April 24th. And then reaching out to obviously our partners across the river in Wisconsin. Fort McCoy was one of the most popular places in all the country to process those new allies of ours. So that will be an upcoming program that we invite you to join us for on April 24th to hear from Jeff Patton and others. And then lastly, boy, right? 20 years ago, some of us watched in the news and others of us were on the front line, and all of our lives have been changed as a result of it. I want to just express my gratitude to Eric Wright and the other veterans on this call, General Votel, Michael Rodriguez, and others for all that you've done and continue to do. God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you in the very near future. Do have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Godspeed.
Godspeed.
Thank you, Randall. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Good night, all.